I am curious why almost none of you are in the middle. Do you know something about the panelists that I should be aware of? In any event, I've been in the industry for a very long time, since dinosaurs roamed the internet. Some of the transactions that I've been involved in, first is I was a game designer, and more recently I've been either an advisor or a board member, but that means functionally a consultant. Some of the acquisitions that you may know were Playdom, which was sold to Disney for around $600 million, PlaySpan, which was sold to Visa for about 200 and some odd million, and Wireless Generation, which was sold to News Corp for around 350 million. In any event, but you're here to hear these gentlemen, which I should introduce from going from my far left and your far right. We have Drew Boortz, who is the Managing Vice President, Western Business Development for Nexon, which is the huge Korean and Japanese company. Some of the recent transactions in which Drew has been involved include Boss Key, which is Cliff Blazinski's studio, QC Games, which is an ex-BioWare group, and First Strike Games, which they're doing a distribution deal for, which is X343 Industries. Next to him is Shanti Bergel, who up until 2 weeks ago was the senior corporate development person at GREE. GREE decided that Shanti had done such a good job in putting together a collection of acquisitions, including Funzio, which was a $200 million acquisition, which, according to many industry sources and all the tracking services, paid itself back within 3 years. So that was one of his coups. He is now a game industry investor, including his most recent investment in Bitcraft Esports Ventures. He is an angel investor in Super Evil Megacore, the mobile MOBA company, and in Armada Interactive. And next to him is Michael Chang, the Senior Vice President, Corporate Development, NCSoft West. Michael has a long and distinguished history in this field, having served in a similar role for Electronic Arts, which is a small little company in Redwood Shores that's been in the games business for a while. NCSoft is currently in the process of looking at acquisitions quite seriously in all three of the mobile, PC, and console space. So we're going to start by reviewing what the deltas are in the last year, because this is a regular session, so those of you can know what the people who are the most active buyers, or who were until 2 weeks ago the most active buyers, are looking at. And one of the major changes is that for 2 of the last 3 years, we saw consolidation hit with a crescendo, where essentially the deals got ever larger until we had the Supercell acquisition, which was nearly $10 billion. We had the Riot Games League of Legends acquisition, which ran into the mid $4 billions, and it gets a little bit more complicated like this. And then finally, we had the Playtika acquisition, which was in the 3.4, 3.6, 3.4. I'm sorry. Okay. Range. We now have, since we are running out of #1 companies to acquire, these gentlemen have now returned to concentrating off mere multi-hundred million and tens of million dollar deals. Drew, can you describe what the appetite that people of your size and perhaps a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, are looking for going forward?
I can certainly describe what I'm looking for. I don't want to pretend to speak for others, but I think, Eric, your point is well taken in that the top and most expensive opportunities are being taken off the table. And part of that means there's a return to rationality in terms of pricing and valuation. Things were just ever escalating for a period of a couple of years, and now we see them coming back down to what at least I think to be a more rational place, which means we are looking at investments of anywhere from in the single-digit millions all the way up to the several hundred millions but the opportunities for 1 billion plus are few and far between these days.
Okay. Shanti, can you give a little bit of a color in terms of where you think, the question that most people want to ask, this is a developer and smaller publisher thing, what the sweet spot is in terms of, what gets the attention of $1 billion company, like the one that you served for the last 7 or 8 years?
Close to 6.
Okay.
Until 2 weeks ago. It was 2 weeks, apparently, as Eric pointed out. Yes, thank you for that. So I think as Drew says, the mature companies are looking, like at this point for revenues, and that leads them to, like spaces like mobile, to some degree spaces like, PC and console, and the marketplace for transactions in those categories has become, I think, fairly normal. It's not the rush that it was over the last, say, 4 years. From an investor perspective, the new hotness has shifted. So there's a definite difference between that which is interesting to a strategic and that which is interesting to an early stage or even a mid-stage investor. So I would say in games, I think a lot of attention has moved to areas like esports, to strangely enough back to PC, and there is definitely huge opportunity left in the mature spaces, but from an early stage investor's perspective, it is more, the deck is stacked in the favor of the larger organizations who have systemic advantage in marketing, in kind of certain IP and certain studio assets that they have inside their companies. That said, there are outlier events that happen, and I think that should give us all hope as members of the space that there are companies coming out of nowhere from time to time with massive hits. Admittedly, some of these are a bit iconic and unique. I'm thinking specifically in this case of Pokemon Go. So Niantic came out, arguably of nowhere with a true phenomenon, and it was possible only because of mobile. There is no other platform that has that scale, that reach, that global kind of gestalt-making power. And so there is a lot of opportunity left in the tank in mobile, but the way that a strategic sees it versus the way that an investor sees it are quite different. So folks like Drew and Michael represent kind of these large strategic companies that are going to be trying to make the next $1 billion franchise and also buy the companies that might eventually make up the rest of their balance sheet. Folks like me who are looking to invest in the next big thing, we're not necessarily looking to invest in mobile game studios anymore, but we are looking to invest in other adjacent spaces like esports.
So, Michael, 2 parts. I was going to ask you to discuss, last year the focus was show me mobile, show me mobile, show me mobile, and Shanti is suggesting that it's different. And obviously, you had said you're looking at PC and console. Can you just, to ground people, give a shift from when you were first at Casual Connect, what you were last year and what you are this year?
Actually, I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience. We've got Mario from Pickpocket in New Zealand, Kevin Shrapnel, my son. I think that's Ice. I can't see because the lights. Ice. Yeah. So a lot of friendly faces here. Can I ask you guys, how many of you are mobile focused? If you'd raise your hands. Okay. Client download, PC or console. Okay. Browser. Facebook. Anything? Okay. So how many of you have been coming AR, VR? Okay. If I could ask from a timing standpoint, Casual Connect's been around for over a decade, perhaps a decade and a half. How many of you have been coming to this conference for a decade and a half? Okay. How about a decade? 10 years? 7 years? I first came here in 2011. Anyone? Okay. How many of you have been like 5 or 3 years? How many of you your first year? Okay. In 2011, when we were all sitting here, I was 50% Facebook, 50% free-to-play mobile. As time has gone on, things evolved. Before my time, it was browser-based, the client download titles that Big Fish was doing. In the last few years, it's been much more mobile. I'd love to ask, and obviously things have evolved since then, how many people believe the gaming markets are larger than they've ever been? Raise your hand if you believe that to be true. You'd be right. How many of you believe that the opportunities for independence have been better than ever before because the markets for gaming are larger? Less hands, but a few. Okay. as time has gone on, we move with the markets. We move to different areas, whether it be Facebook, to mobile, next generation console, VR. We're always looking for the next new thing. And selfishly, you should be looking for the next new thing too. If I could ask the audience, where would you go right now? So how many of you have Facebook on your phones? Everyone, right? How many of you played Facebook instant message games on your phones? Keep an eye on it. The traffic volumes are pretty interesting these days, right? So what Eric was asking, and what we're trying to give context, the markets have evolved since we've been sitting here, for me, from 2011 to now. We constantly have to keep up, and so do you, if you want to become, ideally, a leader in a small but rapidly growing market, so that you can have a good position, defend that position when someone larger identifies the market, comes in and tries to take it away from you.
All right. And then to wander back to the question, can you just go through what your mix, just to ground it, what your mix of what you were looking at?
Today my mix is 40% mobile, 40% PC console, generally free to play, and 20% AR, VR, MR, or other. Whereas, again, in 2011, it was about 50% Facebook and 50% free to play mobile.
Okay. So in background, Nexon and NCSoft both started in terms of PC browser. Gree, where Shanti was started in mobile. So, Drew, can you give a comparable in terms of where your focus is turned to, the sort of the rough percentages to what Michael gave you?
Yeah, that's about right. I think over the last 12 to 18 months, the people that had given up on PC and console have started to come back. We have, as a company, long held the belief that PC and console gaming is not going anywhere. Mobile is a great market still, but we have seen fewer people charging dead on into mobile in the last 12 months than we did in the previous 12 months. So I would say that PC and mobile together make up probably about 70% of what we're looking at, and then other would make up the remaining 30%.
By the way, I should ask, in the other, do you include non-game, game-related investments like, let's say, analytics or back-end stuff? Because Michael didn't mention that explicitly, but I know that he has looked at for instance, can you say publicly you've looked at one that is...
Looked at a few. We've been involved with a few. Omniata sold to King, for instance.
Yeah. So
Playnomics sold to Unity.
Right. So those were companies that were in the analytics business and so on. So are you including that in your other? You're including that in your other, and same over there.
We've done a few investments in the tech space that relate to games, but we're also looking at newer opportunities. In May, for example, we announced that we led the Series A round for a company in London that's making Toys to Life games. So we're branching out from what we are historically known for doing and looking for the thing that will become that next big opportunity for players, and we want to be a part of that as a first wave.
So the takeaway is, just as Michael was saying, look at what the new people. A year ago, everybody on the stage was saying, we're looking at mobile as the main area. Anything else is going to be an issue. Now you're seeing, Michael obviously is not in a position to talk about the investments, but he is certainly looking at things that are as outside the box, as Drew just mentioned with the Toys to Life.
I can actually talk about one that actually Drew touches on. So Nexon invested in a great company, a great leader, Mark Gerhard, formerly the CEO of Jagex, and a company called PlayFusion and Toys to Life. We recently followed on to investment from a London venture partners deal, a company called Reach Robotics. So think about, again, Toys to Life, robots / game on phone, right?
Congratulations, by the way. That's a solid investment.
Mark Gerhard.
So what you're seeing is one of the things, and thank you for that, Michael, because that was one of the ones I wanted to bring up. You'll note that these are not the only two big players who have suddenly gone from telling you that they were very conservative in their outlook to that they are doing things that are not obvious. When Michael pulled the troops, it was not one of the things that came up.
I'd also say, interesting too, what has Activision stepped away from? Skylanders. What did Disney step away from? Infinity. And yet, we're going in. in the same way, too, as people will step away from mobile, perhaps to go back to console and PC because it's more difficult, more expensive, perhaps those who stay in the business on the mobile side may have greater opportunity again.
In a way, it's not unlike Web 1.0 and then Web 2.0. You had a peak, you had a valley, and then you had a follow-on peak as the ecosystem matured, as people figured out where the opportunities within those systems really lie. A lot of what is disfavored today might be hugely favored 3 to 5 years from now, and that's a lot of what my job is at a strategic investor level, is to try and forecast where we think things will be and do what we can to position the company accordingly.
So one of the fashions of the last 3-4 years, which matters to all of you who are individuals, was the strategics were giving essentially the equivalent of a Series A and funding companies, studios that came together. And usually it was, we'll take 2 people from this successful studio and 1 person from that successful studio, or we'll go with someone who's a real star player. An example, of course, is Drew's investment in Cliff Bleszinski, which was made several years ago.
Yes, 2013 was when we did the deal.
So, but in the last year, we have seen a drop-off across the field in terms of you're not seeing as many announcements as that. Is that just a dip because there weren't particular opportunities, or is that something that we can expect to see? In other words, we're supposed to see that strategics less interested in giving $5-10 million to a studio forming going forward.
I think it's a combination of a couple of factors. One is that a lot of the investments we used to make, at the time, the market was, here's a piece in equity, here's a publishing and finance deal, they go hand in hand, now you run off and you make a game. And some of those were successful and some of those were not. At the same time, there has been a widespread adoption of technologies that make it much easier to stand up prototypes pretty quickly. The third factor in this was that a lot of those superstar level people had come out of wherever they were, had gotten financing, had set up their studios, were off and running. So after that first cycle went through, you started seeing a lot of the people that were maybe a cut below those superstars. Still highly talented people, but maybe not the same level of brand name recognition. And they were trying, as Eric points out, to pull together supergroups. I'm going to pull 2 people from this company and 2 people from that company, and we never have worked together, but collectively we have decades of product shipping experience. And so the appetite for investment from certainly my company and perhaps the same from my colleagues here became less about, I want to give you equity, and it became much more about, show me what you can do as a unit, stand up a prototype, let's talk, but you're not going to do an equity investment and a prototype deal simultaneously. Those 2 things just don't really go together.
And something that these gentlemen are too polite to say, there are also almost everyone who invests in this category has the company that's been taking too long to develop, and where the technology is not yet, it's not ready to launch because they get into a rushing cycle. And yes, it was the issue. I think you hit upon the issue that was the single factor, which was these guys have not worked together before. Michael, are you seeing things the same going forward, or because you did make an investment like this a couple of years ago?
We're obviously doing less early stage stuff in mobile right now. Again, I'm going to pick on the audience. I'm going to look at Albert and Mario, and actually Shanti. So Shanti and I used to work together at EA. Shanti at EA, then Playfish. Shanti, if you remember back when Playfish started, when Facebook games started, how much would it cost to make a game then versus Sim Social, right? And then for myself in mobile, and all of you guys who were in mobile earlier on, how much was it to make a game back in 2010, 2011 in mobile? So I joined EA June 1st, 2010. The first conference I was going to was E3. My colleagues had set me up with a small Finnish game company that made a game about birds and pigs. The budgets there were quite small. We were talking to a Russian company, Zeptolab. You guys play Cut the Road? 2 brothers, outsourced artists, outsourced music person. We were talking about budgets of maybe like $500,000 per game. Today, we barely see anything that doesn't have like a $4 or $5 million development budget, give or take different costs in different regions and labor credits. And more importantly, the reserves for first-year user acquisition marketing, in some cases as much as $10, $20, $30 million. That's why you don't see as many of these early-stage mobile deals being done, right? Again, it's not to say that you can't do something and be great with a small amount of money, but realistically, given what we see King, Machine Zone, EA, other people spending on user acquisition, Zynga, we have to keep that in consideration.
Thank you. Moving on, Shanti, you touched upon this, but not wearing your angel investor hat, can you just briefly discuss the difference, and Drew also touched upon this, between how strategics look at investment versus acquisition? And actually add on to one thing, you said partnerships, so distribution. So just it would be useful to go, how do strategics review that? Because they are, as the title said, a triple threat.
Yeah, so not speaking as an investor, but as a former strategic, I guess the view to investment is usually more tactical. It's around like a specific title. It is around working with a specific group of developers who you find very talented. So it is in certain cases it is a trial run perhaps for something more strategic, but it is thought of, I think, in a much smaller box. And the hurdle is less internally in terms of getting it cleared, so to speak. Is a little more kind of opportunistic and tactical than an acquisition, which is a truly strategic move by a company, usually for a very kind of well thought out reason. And so the company that chooses to go that far usually has identified like a full-blown strategy, hopefully, around why this type of transaction makes sense, the type of team members they're seeking to bring in, the type of IP they're seeking to bring in, the type of technology that they themselves don't have or are seeking to get into. And so it is clearly a bigger deal from that perspective. One can breed the other, and sometimes those conversations, just from a partnership perspective, do kind of cross over back and forth. You can have conversations with folks initially that either end in an investment or don't, but later lead to an acquisition. So these things, I think, organically live kind of in a band from a partnership perspective that is somewhat organically cohesive. But in terms of how the strategic sees it, those are definitely very different ideas. And in content, typically the investment is around like titles or investments in a given area that the strategic doesn't know very well, thinks about opportunistically, versus an acquisition, which is much more something that the company intends to wear for a long time, hopefully. And so it is like a multi-year kind of commitment on their part.
So Michael, to build upon what Shanti said, you've often, starting at EA, pointed out there are a lot of these things are driven by what moves the needle for the company, and that makes a different attitude. So you can elaborate upon that for the people here who want to figure out, who want to understand if they're dealing with strategic investors, how to use their time efficiently by going after what motivates the strategic investor.
So I'm going to put on my old EA hat. How much do you think a top EA mobile title makes in a year, if you had to guess? From call it millions of revenue. Is it $1 million, 10 million, 100 million? What do you think is a top performing title at EA right now? A year? More like 100. Okay. NCSoft, I don't think, has confirmed or denied what we're doing on titles here. There are some industry rumors that the recent Lineage title released in Korea alone is doing as much as $6 to $8 million a day. Again, there's no confirmation now. I'm just repeating a market rumor that's been published a few times.
So for those of you who don't have a calculator, that's a rumored $2 billion a year.
So even if it's $1 billion of revenue, we've got to get involved in some pretty serious things to move the needle, right? And that's Korea only. That's right, not the rest of the world.
Rumored.
Sure. I'm just reading what I heard in the paper. I have no information about it. Right? It informs where we need to get involved in more mature markets like mobile right now. And if you look back to, and this is again before my time in games, there were lots of console game companies and PC game companies, and then there were a few. Now you have EA, Activision, Take-Two, Ubisoft, a few others, right? Size. In mobile, there were, if you guys remember 6, 7 years ago, there were hundreds of these companies, right? There's not going to be as many sustainable and state. It's great for infrastructure providers and ad network providers. They don't have to chase hundreds of independents anymore. Now they have to focus on the guys who have the war chest to spend money on UA, right? There were a lot of Facebook companies a long time ago. How many of them do you know now? So for ourselves, and hopefully for yourselves too, what we've seen is that new platforms create new markets. When the PC first came out, we all had to own PCs. Think about the gaming markets created for PCs. When phones came out, when we all have to own, have feature phones, there's a market there for feature phones. Smartphones, again, we know what has happened with Apple and Android. We're all looking for what's next. We thought maybe it was going to be VR. We all know what the ship volumes are for HTC, Oculus, Daydream, Samsung Gear. It's interesting, but it's not necessarily of such size and scale yet that we all have to pile in. Does anyone know where the next platform is? Because that's what we all need to hunt for our future.
Obviously, it's Toys to Life. You've given away the two of you.
It's one potential.
Right.
Yeah.
It's rumored. in Korea.
Does anyone have any other ideas about a next platform that's coming up? Is it an Apple Watch?
Michael has a checkbook.
So I'm going to pick on one, but I'm hoping people can make a guess on this. Is it a watch? How many people say it's a watch if you raise your hand? Crickets. No one. Okay. How many people raise your hands if you believe that Albert's right, whether it be HTML5 on a browser, or HTML5 through an instant message, through Facebook messaging or something like that? Okay. So Albert's got some agreeers, but not dominant. How many of you own, I'm not saying this is a good market, but I'm going to ask you, how many of you own Google Home or Alexa Echo? Raise your hand if you got one. Okay. I want you all to close your eyes. Just all of you close your eyes for a minute. Nothing bad's going to happen. Alexa, play Spelling Bee quiz. Alexa, play Name That Tune. How many of you thought that you could play games on Alexa? Raise your hands if you thought you could play games on Alexa and make money doing that. Can't make money yet. But again, if at some point in time we all need to have Google Home or Alexa Echo or some equivalent in our car or something like that, there may be another platform for entertainment, so to speak. I'm not saying this is a real market today, but I'm just asking everyone to think about what could be an important area to be a leader in 1, 2, 3, or 5 years from now.
Michael's point is the installed base on the VR platforms are either, you can claim 10 million, but that includes 9, 10 million that were given away with, that are given away with phone subs. But of the ones that are bought, it is under 5 and maybe under 4 million. But Alexa and Google Home are higher than that. Let's go back to something that you skipped you skipped over, which is AR. When it became apparent that the VR install numbers for last year were so disappointing by comparison to the ridiculous hype, in fairness to VR, the hype was just, it had to either be as good as sex or achieve godhead based on the numbers from 2015 and the projections. So people went to AR, and there were two distorting factors for that. One was that AR was not VR, so they wanted to go to the next choice, so it became the received wisdom. And the other was the 8,000-pound Pokemon in the park, which has so far not been a replicable experience. So can you talk briefly about, just as you set up the context, what are the gating events that make AR work? Apple is now putting AR into their phone. So one of you gentlemen talk to what the addressable audience might be for that and when?
Sure. So just to talk about Pokemon real quick, I don't think that necessarily Pokemon Go is a proof point for AR going forward. I think Pokemon Go is a black swan outlier, in a lot of ways barely an AR game if you think about it. I think a lot of the people who play at the upper levels of that game don't even turn that feature on. They basically just kind of turn the camera part off because it kind of slows down your progress. So I think it is an important proof point on the road to thinking about what AR could be and getting more adoption from a mass audience for the idea of playing something that way. I think the introduction of various bits of technology that are additive to that overall kind of audience narrative are exciting. I think they're most exciting for people at the very early stage. Like has been pointed out, there isn't much of a revenue model for any of this stuff yet. But like if you have conviction around the potential of a platform to make a compelling piece of entertainment, that can comfort you on the road toward seeing an install base. I think larger companies wait until the install base is already there because they have a lot more at stake, like per investment and per kind of team that they put on something. Smaller teams have the flexibility of conviction and going out and proving that point. And so I think AR is potentially a very exciting place from that perspective, but so was VR. And as Michael has pointed out, like the path to getting an install base seems to be very slow. What is it about AR that might fix that? What is it about that type of experience that might compel people to want to have one? And most important for me when I look at these things is use it every day. I think this is the thing that we all learned from social gaming and from mobile gaming later, is that the power of a persistent connection with your gaming experience is extremely important. And so there's a reason that I think VR has been slow to take off, because if you've tried some of the content that's out there, it's really enjoyable, but you don't feel that compelling need to go back and experience it again, another session in the same day or another session tomorrow. And so I think that's where I'm excited to see something come out of all of the investments that are being made by large companies in AR. Is will that use case materialize where I as a player want to consistently interact with this world via this particular play pattern, and then I think hardware can follow, but without that type of anchor example for the mass audience to just gel around and go like, oh, well, that's why I have to have that. It's a little bit like like why all the console companies fund tentpole content on their consoles, is that you need a compelling reason to go buy a PlayStation or an Xbox. You need a compelling reason to not necessarily go buy an AR device, whatever that turns out to be, but to interact with it regularly in a way that is meaningful to you in some kind of a play pattern. Speakers are not a crazy idea. I think social taught us that distribution first and entertainment later is a possibility. So I mean, the numbers for Amazon Echo are starting to become very interesting, primarily because they're able to do an OEM-like strategy and work through other channels. And so the addressable numbers that are out there eventually through API are going to be good. And so that might be another interesting market that might materialize on the hardware side first and then play pattern later. I think AR will be the other way around.
So to pull together, Shanti points out something. You look for installed base. You look for a pattern where people will be using it regularly. They have reasons to come back to it. And it does not matter that the revenue, it does not matter if you have those first two, if the revenue model if there's any revenue model that's apparent. One of the best examples, which Shanti mentioned in passing, in 2009, we had a social games panel with Playfish, Playdom, and Zynga. And everybody in the industry knew you couldn't make money in social games. And one of the things I said on stage that year is, one of the reasons you can tell they are making money is I've never heard game companies basically try and downplay their revenues, because everyone was so convinced that the money wasn't there. The targets you need to go after, it's Wayne Gretzky's, you don't want to be where the puck is, you want to skate to where the puck is going to go. And that's, do you believe that there will be an install base within 2 to 4 to 5 years? And do you see a play pattern? Obviously, Albert sees that in HTML5. That's what you should be looking for, because that's what all these gentlemen are looking for.
Actually, let's pick on that for a minute. Think about Facebook. They're not dumb people, right? They're on everyone's phones. Do you think they would love to find their way out of Apple App Store or Google Play? Do you think they want to be paying 30% to Apple and Google? Wouldn't they kill to find a way to get around that, to get to you directly? So Albert may not be wrong on the HTML5 side. I will actually say this. If you could raise your hands, how many of you played Pokemon Go when it first came out? Keep your hands up for a minute. And bring your hands down if you don't play anymore. So meaning keep your hands up if you're an active player. So still an active player, not that many, right? But it's still number 5 on the top grossing charts right now today. So I was just pulling this up right now. Yeah, and honestly, tomorrow I'm going to go take a break and go off to the. I don't know if you guys know, there's a famous Bellevue Park around here where tons of people go at night. There's a bunch of Poke Stops. I'm just going to see if people are still out there doing that.
People are.
Yeah.
But there's a point that I think is being missed here, which is with regard to AR, there's a level of IP affinity that has to sit on top of that.
Right.
A lot of people forget that Niantic started with an AR game that I believe was called Ingress. And really didn't do much of anything, and they were able to adapt a lot of that into Pokemon Go. You put the Pokemon IP on it, and all of a sudden, this thing explodes.
Right.
So AR is still a very nascent opportunity. It's a blue sky territory as far as I'm concerned. But and I think, Shanti, this was perhaps your best point in there. There has to be a compelling reason to play. And
let's ask this audience, of everyone here and everyone was playing Pokemon Go, how many, when they're playing, turned AR off? I turned it off. How many? So, really.
There's two parts to that. One is, did you have the camera that overlaid the Pokemon on real life or turn it off? That was a battery issue by and large. The other thing is, are you getting up out of a chair and going out into the world?
Right.
So I would say no one turned off the AR bit.
Oh, so I turned it off because it annoyed me, right? Not even the battery side of things.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm saying is the AR part was out in the real world. You had to walk somewhere. You had to go places. You couldn't sit in your house and experience the whole game.
But what do we all have? Where Apple's coming out with AR Kit. So yes, AR will have an established base, an established platform of installed base of users, right? Because we're all still going to be having our phones. So when AR games come out, if they come out well, they will have an established platform base to work with, right?
So, Drew, I want to just go back to one question. Do you believe that IP that is below the top 5 in the world level that Pokemon was, and the next one is rumored to be the Harry Potter one, which is, if it's not in the top 5, it's in the top 10. Do you believe that we're in a position where something that's a perfectly good license, like The Walking Dead, can do well in AR, or are we not yet at that point?
The key thing to be answered for me with AR is, why does this experience necessitate me going outside of my home, outside of my office, interacting with others? And Pokemon was the best and really, I think, only good example to date. With any other IP, I'm going to have that same question of, why do I have to be out in the real world? If it's Walking Dead and I'm fighting zombies or I'm running away from zombies, can I do that in my house, or do I need to be out in IRL, so to speak?
Well, why can't AR work in the house? I mean, the issue is we don't know enough about AR. It can work. I'm going to move on just because we've got a time limit, which is, for the last several years, we've been telling you that the center of gravity in the global investment and game market has moved to Asia, with China the leader. China has had the first sign of any check. I mean, it was going at such a breakneck speed, but one of the things that all of these guys know about is China has now clamped down on acquisitions and so on. So do you want to talk about, all of you have played across the 3 major continents, North America, Europe, and Asia. Can you describe what's going forward now that China's checked a little bit?
More opportunity for the Koreans?
It feels a lot better this year for us than last year. Prices were very high. The players who were buying were not necessarily game companies or strategics. You had all types. Construction companies,
chicken farmers.
Let's not think of them because they're actually doing good. They made good buys, but
coal miners. Coal miners.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad that's not there, but at the same time, I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American. Let's go through the list of American buyers. So my former home, Shanti's former home, EA. I'm going to pick on them. They haven't done a deal since I left in early 2013. Activision, they cut a big check for King. Take-Two, Social Point, pretty notable in recent times, but kind of one somewhat larger transaction, right? Ubisoft, a few smaller ones. Certainly not as active as many of the Asian investors and buyers. I would love to see the American buyers, buy more, but I can't force them to do that.
Okay. And Shanti, you obviously had a portfolio that went from Southeast Asia and Australia to Europe to the U.S. How do you see that? I mean, are we just looking at a global market where we're just going to move to targets of opportunity? But what can you describe looking forward?
You talking about on the China point or just in general?
Just in general.
So I think the China thread is important because it impacts kind of the valuation of companies that are out in the market now. So the motivation for some of those transactions was kind of China-specific arbitrage, and so I think there was necessarily was always going to be a bit of a bubble, and so it passing through is natural. And so I think the companies that are kind of seeking exits over the next year or two will kind of still be kind of mild beneficiaries of it, but we'll see a kind of a return to normalcy. And so the holes that buyers are filling. So if you look at what is it that Michael wants to buy, that Drew wants to buy, that all the companies that Michael just named are looking to fill. I mean, that moves in lockstep with the maturity of given spaces and the opportunity that people perceive in new ones. And so as you hear that mobile, for example, is much more mature, that tends to slow down the acquisition pace of companies who are trying to build up assets to go after that, because they then kind of fill those asset portfolios out and they don't have as many holes in their portfolio. And then threads in the background like this kind of Chinese arbitrage wind, they come and they go, but that overriding dynamic of what do the buyers want and how competitive will they be? Will there be 2, 3, 4 of them, kind of talking to your investment banker if you have one when they're trying to gin up a bidding process? That's probably the more permanent state of affairs, is how competitive is it really, and what goals do these guys have that they're trying to achieve? What's their plan? And I think what you're hearing is that everybody's kind of getting a little bit more comfort with what were the new platforms, and they're seeking the next ones. And so there isn't quite that overriding industry-wide dynamic of, oh, there's a rush for this, there's a rush for mobile, there's a rush for social. Those existed. And those were kind of unnatural moments in time as far as our industry progression historically. So will we have another one? Will we have another one of these kind of great rushes for, kind of build and buy? That remains to be seen. And I don't think you're hearing anybody say, it's going to be this one. It's going to be AR. It's going to be, H265.
I'm confident there will be a gold rush. Bets. It's just a question of what that next one is.
I'm less confident that it will look like a rush. So I hope so. I hope so. Okay. I hope there's a rush in esports, because I just invested.
Which side are you coming down on?
I'm with Shanti on this one.
Huh.
All right. Drew, do you want to...
I always have hope, right? We're all going to make lots of money in the next new rush.
Right. Right. You're right. The heart may be, the head may be with Shanti and Drew, but the heart should be with Michael.
I'm excited because Michael's going to buy a lot of companies. That's what I just heard.
Yeah.
And so, by the way, we can line up outside. He'll have his checkbook out. Anyway, we are now hitting the mark at which are there questions from the audience that you want to take. If you're interested, please raise your hand.
Yeah, I think most indie developers are sort of cash on cash, running their company to hope to have excess cash that they can then distribute out to the principals. And I was wondering, what is the actual motivation of the large company like EA or anyone when they don't actually distribute cash to the shareholders, right? So are they trying to increase the stock price by getting into a sexy genre or sexy platform? What is the core? Why does the CEO say, go buy this?
Well, actually, some companies do dividend out cash. You can do share buybacks, so you reduce the number of shares outstanding. So it's effectively, it is at some level sort of a dividend in some play. And frankly, you're building a war chest to reinvest in new products and stay competitive in the market, right? So you have to generate a return on your cash so you can reinvest. There used to be a rule at EA, I don't know if it's still there, they called it a 30% RP, 30% responsibility profit. You wouldn't do a project if you didn't think you could make 30%. There are many reasons why you do that. I always thought part of the reason was so you could reinvest in the business, and as the markets became more competitive, you would have enough cash to reinvest and stay competitive with the market.
So if you look at, for instance, Activision, which is the largest American company by market capitalization, it is World of Warcraft and it is Call of Duty, and yet King.com, their acquisition, generated more cash for them, more profits for them last year. So that's the extreme side. But to return to this gentleman's question about what, why a Nexon, let's say, or Agree buys a company that is not going to move the needle in the next quarter. Can you just elaborate to his answer?
I would say that the expectation is not for an immediate moving the needle. We're positioning for what will happen to the value of our company in 3 years, 5 years, maybe as long as 7 or 9 years, depending on the investment. We are making sure that this company will be in a position to continue to either grow market share, be the market leader, whatever it may be, rather than strictly speaking trying to generate cash to distribute in the short term.
I will also say,
go ahead.
For what we're focused on, I value the past. It's great to show what you can do, but I'm always focused on acquisitions on the future slate and whether the talent after acquisition will stay.
Okay. Blockchain as it applies to games.
We're going to toss that to the independent investor.
Shanti, I know you can't announce your blockchain investment until next week, but it's rumored to be occurring in Korea, so go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to plead a lot of ignorance on this.
Okay, who's going to plead less ignorance among the two remaining panelists?
Blockchain needs to figure itself out before certainly my company will take it seriously as an opportunity. For those of you that follow, you're probably aware that there is a massive shift that is on the verge of happening with regard to Bitcoin in particular, the so-called hard fork, that is going to split Bitcoin into two camps that aren't going to play very nicely with each other. This is an opportunity perhaps for investors, but for a strategic, it is way too chaotic and way too unpredictable to take seriously as an opportunity right now. Plus, there really isn't a game tie-in. It's a monetary play or a way in which people spend for the games. Nexon tends to be focused more on the gameplay experiences we can deliver rather than the way in which a player might have 50 opportunities to give us their money.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Michael, Shanti, and Drew.